The movie opens in outer space with the starship Avalon on autopilot, heading to the colony world of Homestead 2 during a mass exodus of Earth's population. The crew and the 5,000 passengers are all in hibernation pods for the 120-year journey. 30 years into the journey, the ship travels through a meteor storm, and power is diverted to the forward shields. Then, the ship collides with a large meteor, and the power blinks. Red alert screens come on in the control area, then quickly go back to normal. Something bad has happened. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, wakes up in his pod with a cheery computer voice telling him that soon they will be arriving at Homestead 2. He is told that it is normal to feel confused and weak after being in hibernation. The wristband on his arm is scanned, and the computer leads him to his cabin, where he sleeps. The next day, he wakes up and tries to decide what to wear when meeting fellow passengers. Then, he makes his way to a cafeteria, where he is the only one. He goes to an orientation session about life as a colonist on Homestead, but he is the only one there. The cheery, computer-generated instructor cannot understand his question about why no one else is there. Jim goes to the grand concourse and gets no assistance from the data stand. He finds an office where he can make an impression on the resident organization, but he is cautioned that it will be costly. He communicates a message explaining that he is the only one awake and needs assistance, then figures out it will be 15 years before anybody on Earth receives his message. He is all alone. Jim finds manuals for all the ship's equipment. He studies the manual on the hibernation pods, but cannot find a way to restart them once a person has woken up. He cannot get into the area where the crew pods are to try and wake anyone for help, and he cannot access the command area. His wristband does not give him the proper clearance. Jim finds the robot bartender, Arthur, who he can talk to, but the robot is programmed to dispense bartender advice, like, if you don't like where you are, change things. Jim is a general class passenger with a basic cabin, and he breaks into a suite with nicer amenities. A year passes as Jim makes use of the ship's entertainment facilities, but without other people, he becomes desperately lonely. He goes to an area where passengers can put on a spacesuit and go outside while safely tethered to the ship. Jim contemplates suicide by opening the airlock without a spacesuit, but he stops himself and runs into the pod area. He trips near a pod with a lovely woman inside, Aurora, Jennifer Lawrence. He studies her passenger profile, which she had recorded before the ship set sail. She is a journalist traveling to Homestead to have an adventure and learn why people choose to be colonists. He reads her stories and thinks she is perfect. He wrestles with himself about waking her up, knowing that it will doom her to die on the ship, but he cannot stand the isolation after a year alone. So, he manually wakes her pod, hiding before she can see him. The same cheery computer program wakes up Aurora and leads her to her cabin to sleep. The next day, she wakes up alone and wanders to the grand concourse, where she meets Jim. He tells her the truth about how long he has been awake, but doesn't tell her that he woke her up. He has asked Arthur, the robot bartender, not to tell Aurora what he has done, and Arthur agrees. Aurora and Jim talk daily, discussing ways to fix the pods. Aurora swims, runs, and begins to write her story. She asks Jim why he left Earth, and he says he likes to make things and fix things. On Earth, things get replaced when they break instead of being repaired. He wants to live in a house he builds himself. Aurora's plan was to travel to the colony, spend a year there talking to colonists about why they left Earth, and then return. Aurora is a gold-class passenger and uses her status to procure more elaborate breakfast meals than Jim's standard clearance entitles him to. After getting to know each other, Jim asks Aurora on a date, and she accepts. After dinner, he takes her to the spacesuit room, where they both suit up and go outside. When they return, Aurora is excited, and they go to Jim's cabin and make love. They are happy, settling into a routine of exercise, watching the stars, and taking advantage of the ship's entertainment and restaurant venues. Another year passes, and it's Aurora's birthday. Jim plans a special surprise. He has made a ring for her. In the bar, Aurora tells Arthur that she and Jim have no secrets. Jim agrees, not realizing that Arthur interprets this as meaning that Jim has told Aurora that he woke her up. When Jim steps into the men's room, Arthur tells Aurora what a good choice Jim made in waking her up. Aurora is devastated and furious. She tells Jim to stay away from her. One night she enters his cabin while he is sleeping and assaults him with her fists. As she runs, Jim uses the ship's intercom to try to explain himself, but Aurora screams that he took her life. Meanwhile, the control room is receiving more frequent alerts of system failures. Jim and Aurora have already noticed small issues, like cleaning robots malfunctioning. It has now been 2 years since the meteor collision. One day, Gus, Lawrence Fishburne, wakes up and appears on the concourse. He is a deck crew chief and has woken up early. Hibernation pods have never failed before, and he explains that something major is wrong. His wristband grants them access to the command center, where they discover that the ship's automatic diagnostics have failed. They need to check every deck manually. Before they can do this, there is a major gravity failure, and Aurora almost drowns while swimming. Gus finds that there have been cascading failures. The computer creates a timeline showing that the first failure was 2 years prior. Gus determines that the initial failures caused power diversions to try and rebalance the load, but the load became too heavy, leading to more failures. The entire ship is in danger of becoming dead in space, dooming everyone on board. The first affected area was the main engine room, but they must conduct a manual inspection to locate the problem. Before this can happen, Gus collapses. Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary and use the auto-diagnostic scanner. The system detects multiple organ failures caused by his malfunctioning pod. Death is imminent. Gus puts on his uniform, prepares to die, and gives Jim and Aurora his wristband so they can access restricted areas. In engineering, Jim and Aurora find a hole made by a meteorite that has damaged critical areas. When they open a door, Aurora is nearly sucked into space. She blocks the hole with a tablet Jim pushes to her, and he uses a liquid sealant to further secure it. The area pressurizes, and they learn that the fusion engine exhaust must be manually vented. The manual override won't work. Jim must enter the exhaust passage to open a flap, but it won't stay open unless he holds it. Aurora, now desperate not to lose him, argues over the radio, but Jim insists. She pulls the lever, and Jim is blown into space. His tether breaks, and there is a hole in his suit. He tells Aurora goodbye. She rushes to get a spacesuit and retrieves him. Inside, Jim is unresponsive. Aurora drags him to the infirmary, where the autodoc declares him dead. She uses Gus's wristband and override code to resuscitate Jim, and it works. He is alive. Aurora is overjoyed. Later, Jim tells Aurora he found a way to put her back in hibernation, but she chooses to stay awake with him. 88 years later, the crew awakens to find the Grand Concourse transformed into a lush garden with a tree, vines, birds, and a cabin, possibly holding Jim and Aurora's descendants. Aurora's voiceover narrates her story, explaining how they built a good life where they were. Thank you for watching, and see you again in another movie.